Hi everyone, Jeremy here at Damn Good Doctors Club. Welcome to another episode of the Nightcast, where we stay up with the crickets and expand upon some frameworks for the future of medicine. This episode is going to unpack a question that we had come up in our group, Damn Good Doctors Club, and one of our guests kind of brought up this topic. We were talking about burnout and the growth arc of a practitioner, right? As we go through this journey, and kind of to catch you up with this conversation a little bit, is that we have point A, where we are brand new, right? Point A, it's like you have this hungry ghost kind of mentality. The belief is like more. I need more patients. I need to be busier. If you're selling appointments, you want to see a nice full schedule and sell your time, and that's a belief, and that becomes the reality. And then eventually, with any luck, we get what we wanted, and then we're at point B, whether that's a year later, 10 years later, 20 years later, who knows how long it's going to take, depends on the individual, right? But we get to point B, and then we have that full practice, that fullness, and now it's like dangerous because you can actually get quite burned out here doing something that you love and you get what you thought you wanted, but it turns out in the background there was something else that you really wanted inside and you just didn't know how to build it. You wind up a little bit capped, a little bit trapped in a system, especially if it's a time for money kind of system. So this is where a lot of our work shines, of breaking into new nonlinear business models and practice models, and some things that I've discovered and synthesized from various sources that really changed the arc and trajectory of my career. It's been pretty wild. So I try to share some of these insights, right? I'm coming back with the things I've seen and the different turns I've taken and what a difference that has made. So we're talking about burnout, and here is a guest in the group, and she said, there's also an offshoot for me. The feeling is if something is off track, but is it? Is it a comparison to others, or is it a sensation of something is askew and not knowing where to go, or anxiety of wanting to be further ahead than where one is, I am, and trying to speed up the process, right? And this is a very insightful observation and question, and we are going to unpack this, because as we start to look at these types of questions, this type of thinking, it's going to reveal a lot, and it'll actually open some doors, because we need to get outside of subconscious training glitches, right? And this is what she's doing here. She's kind of scratching at that, like she knows. I think she knows that there's something under here, and so I'm just going to help a little bit with the peeling back of that, so we can illuminate some of this, so that we're not just doing random stuff for the sake of change in our practice and in our life, right? And also balancing out this need for growth and development and exploration and depth in our career and in our professional and our personal life, right? It's all growth and development, balancing that out with actually just feeling peaceful and happy and content along the process, right? So she goes on, I'm often questioning acceptance to the process of natural unfolding, or fear the tiger is right behind, fueling the need for change versus actual stuckness. And then do we force or just wait for some sign? So the way I understand this question, and this is the kind of thing where sometimes it's good to go on a bit of a stream of consciousness and explore, right? Go on to this kind of format instead of typing. If I try to type this out, my thumbs would be broken on my phone. But we can do a bit of meditation, a bit of exploration on this, because there are a lot of little pieces we need to understand to really have context around this kind of question. So what's really happening here is a lot of practitioners come into my world and they can tell that there's something a little bit different happening here, and they want something different for their practice. They want some kind of next level. They want some kind of growth. Sometimes they can articulate it really well, and sometimes it's a vague feeling. And what she's getting at is exploring, where does this feeling come from? Which I think is very worthwhile to do, because we don't want to just be motivated by FOMO, right? By just trying to keep up with others. Like she says, the feeling is if something is off track, but is it? Is it a comparison to others, or is it a sensation of something is askew and not knowing where to go, right? Or anxiety of wanting to be further ahead than where I am and trying to speed up the process, right? I think that this can come from multiple causes, and I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. But what we don't want to do is fall into the trap of just comparing, because everybody's on a little bit of a unique journey, right? There are a lot of quirks. I certainly have my quirks, right? As you've probably noticed, there are a lot of quirks that we have, and just individual factors that are going to come into play. So if you're trying to design a practice You don't want to try to put yourself in a box. You don't want to try to compare yourself to other people. You don't want to just carbon copy or do what they call reasoning by analogy, which is just like, oh, this worked for that other person, so it'll work for me, right? No, we have to look at all the individual bespoke factors in your situation and then figure out, where do you want to go, right? What is this vision you have for your career? Where are you stuck? Or what is the vision that you're trying to achieve? Because I know for me, there have been points in my career where I've had a very clear vision, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've just got to start getting the pieces in place and assemble a bridge to get from where I am to where I want to go, right? It's very clear. And there have been other times, right, where I've had a very clear vision, and I start getting there, and on the way, I learn more. I get a bigger perspective, and I realize the thing I was initially aiming for was actually short-sighted. It was actually limited. And now I see something else and go, okay, this is actually a more expansive trajectory. I'm going to start shifting. I'm going to start building a foundation where I can easily pivot if I need to something much larger. And then there are other times when you get involved with a mentor or a teacher or a mastermind group, and you come in for one reason of like, oh, I want to start to figure out how to, whatever, go online with my practice, right? For example. And in the process of doing that, you are exposed to new ideas you could never even have imagined that you needed or wanted because you were so in the dark, right? You don't know what you don't know. So there's this whole thing with intent, right? I have this intention, I have this vision for my life, but there's also exposure. Like, how open are we to learning as we go and to finding new things? So what we're going to talk about in tonight's episode, amongst other things, is motivation and human motivation. And we need to examine our own motivations as well as start to understand the motivations of the people we work with and just know that they may be different, and that's okay. So there's this quote by a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham, and it goes something like, a man has two masters, pain and pleasure. And this is a way to start to understand what motivates humans, right? And sometimes when we start talking about these things, I like to bring this up from not only like a spiritual context, but also from a straight business, like a little more black and white. And it's, it's a little more sterile, but it's actually a very anatomical way to discuss these things, but it's more the business language. So when you're looking at somebody's behavior, right, in terms of if they're going to jump into a treatment plan with you, if they're going to commit and like take a deep dive, they have to be motivated. So if you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, even though it's not a perfect model and, maybe it wasn't even what he originally intended, doesn't matter. We can still use it as functional, but you've got these base level needs on the bottom of the pyramid, right? Like immediate survival and these kinds of things. And then you start to go up the pyramid and it gets less and less urgent, right? Until it becomes more like self-actualization at the top. And what you could kind of, right, squint your eyes and you could kind of start taking a look at the people you work with and just start to ask yourself the question, like, where are they on that pyramid? Like how, because the lower you go on the pyramid, the more you're going to get like a lot of fear-based motivation, right? Pain, trying to get away from pain. That's at least in the large scale view. I will say it's fractal. And when you zoom into any level on that pyramid, you can also have pain or pleasure motivating behaviors there as well. So be aware of that, right? Just because somebody's nowhere near the poverty line, right? They're living very well and they've got job security, financial security. They don't wonder where their next meal is coming from, right? They may be looking at higher levels, but they also may be doing it to try to escape the tiger that's chasing them in their mind, right? We can have these, what we would call negative motivators, right? Motivating us to do very, very positive things. And it's okay. It's totally okay. We have to accept that, right? But we want to look and go, okay, is somebody more pain motivated or more pleasure motivated? And then also be able to bridge that. So what I mean by this is, okay, somebody's pain motivated. You've got a patient who they're just missing out on everything, right? So for example, maybe you've got somebody who got really hit hard with mold exposure, and everywhere they go, they just feel like a burden. It's just like there's physical pain, sure, and mental pain, like the actual pain of the condition. But then there's the pain points in life where it's like, I can't go with my family to a restaurant because now I'm hypersensitive to all kinds of foods. So I feel left out there, right? And I can't work anymore. And I feel like my status, and I'm just not contributing to life, right? I don't feel good about these things. Low self-esteem, like this can all happen, and it's normal. You put somebody through enough of that and they're going to start to feel the pain close in from all different places. You could also have a person in a similar situation who's not so much motivated by relieving the pain, but they're motivated by regaining the pleasure components. And I know this sounds like just word magic, but you got to start to see this, and you'll start to see, for one, you'll see other people's motivations, but for two, you'll start to understand yourself better. And you'll start to understand if you're more motivated by the carrot or the stick, right? So somebody who really just wants to be able to go to Italy and go sit under the Sistine Chapel and go look at that painting in real life, but they can't travel, right? It's like the pleasure that they're missing out on, that excitement, that adventure, right? That's what's going to motivate them. So what gets really interesting with communication, which is a foundational skill if you're going to have any kind of business, especially something in health, you don't want to have your biases all over the place, right? So if you're somebody who's very pain motivated, so for example, I'm going to generalize here, right? But if, for example, you're a very pain motivated practitioner and you're just trying to escape negativity all the time, right? You're just trying to get out of that, get out of that, get out of that. That's going to cover your language. That's going to stain your communications with pain, 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 pain. And if you're trying to market to a niche of, for example, like biohackers, right? Like maybe you want to help people that are Olympic athletes, right? Somebody like that, people who are basically, they're not on the low end of the bell curve in terms of human function, right? They have their capacity. They have a high functioning job position, right? Whether it's like some biohacker that's a CEO of a large company, or it's an Olympic athlete or whatever, somebody at the top of their game basically. And they're going after what we can generalize as like a more pleasure-based goal, even though, like I said, people in very high positions can also be motivated by escaping pain, right? And we actually see that with a lot of athletes and different people who have really hit the upper echelon. Like, they can also be pain motivated. So you can't look at this as a totally black and white thing. But the point I want to get across is, if you're talking to somebody who's pleasure motivated, but you're tinting the whole conversation with how they can get out of pain, you're going to be talking past each other. They're not going to understand what you're saying, which that's our fault as the practitioner for not communicating what we do in the right way, right? And it's not about just saying what people want to hear, but it's about taking the time to listen and get to know them and find out what actually matters to them, and then talk about what's relevant. Because if you're anything like me, you've got a very vast skill set with many, many applications. So you can't go around describing every single facet and feature of your Swiss Army knife. Nobody has time for that. You want to just be able to start to size up the situation and talk to people about what's relevant for them in a way that they can understand, so they can make a decision if they want you to help them or not, right? It's pretty straightforward. So we have to understand our pain and pleasure motivations. And this also comes to evolving our practice. So I get a lot of practitioners that are kind of more in point B, where they've got, some success. Maybe they've hired associates or something like that. It's a growing clinic, right? They've scaled their clinic up. They're, at the very least, they're not running from the pain of the empty schedule and feeling like they're going to fail and, whatever else, which I've been there. Okay. I can talk about this stuff. I can laugh about this stuff, because guess what? Like, I know what it's like to have a practice tank. I know what it's like to have a newborn baby and be on food stamps and be like, what am I going to do? Right. And have that pain motivation. Even somebody, I've generally am more of a pleasure motivated person, but if you put somebody in a rough enough situation, they will become pain motivated, right? We adapt. It's not black and white. And by the way, when things are at rock bottom like that, and you're just wondering what the fuck you're going to do, a lot of times you need to develop new skills, right? You've got to get your skill gap covered. That's what worked for me. You just have to start to continually invest in yourself and figure out where your leverage points are. So you can't do everything. You can't be everything. But if you're having problems where you can't safely have security around keeping the lights on and any kind of predictability, there's likely some skill gaps. And it might only be one or two things that need to get corrected that will make all the difference at that point. So we have basically marginal gains. You climb up this curve, and when you get started on a growth curve, in the beginning, you can make massive strides with just the right interventions, just a few of them. But over time, you will start to get marginal gains, and that's where we have to do our compounding 1%, 1%, 1%, and just get better, like everywhere over time, if we want to get those improvements. So that's a little bit of a tangent, right? But it's a different way to start thinking about this stuff, because everybody wants to be generally happy in life, right? We don't want to feel pain for the most part. Of course, there are pains that people choose to keep around, but even then we get pleasure out of that, right? There's some reason for self-sabotage, which I'm not going to get into all this tonight. I've made it a big part of my work, actually, is to study self-sabotage in myself, and then to be able to flip that and help other people with it. So in general, a good assumption is that people kind of want to be happy for the most part. They'll find it in different ways. Sometimes they find it through pain, right? But that's a little bit different topic for tonight. So if you're looking at somebody who's thinking about, okay, where's my practice? Like, what is this thing I feel? What is this anxiety, right? It's like, here's the question. Is it pain motivated or is it pleasure motivated? Is there something you want to create that really lights you up? And you're just feeling like, I just don't know how to do that, right? I don't know how to execute that. It's not clear in my mind. I'm trying to figure out what this is going to look like, right? But you can kind of feel this draw, like this pull towards something bright in the future, then that's likely pleasure motivation, right? But if it's like, I think I've been comparing myself to other people, or I've just got some arbitrary programming in my subconscious that I should be further along than I am and all that, then that's pain-based motivation, right? We're trying to avoid shame or jealousy or something like that. They're just lower frequency emotions. They're not bad. They're not wrong. It's just understanding where we are on that scale. And then what this practitioner was asking, which I think is really insightful, is just like, okay, what is really going on here? Is it comparison to others? Is it a sensation that something is askew and not knowing where to go? Is it anxiety of wanting to be further ahead than where I am, trying to speed up the process, right? Or this kind of vague feeling like something's off track. I'm often questioning acceptance to the process of natural unfolding, or fear the tiger is right behind, fueling need for change versus actual stuckness. Right? It's really interesting because we don't want to be limited by this pain or pleasure bias either. It's a construct, right? What I've shared with you is a framework. It's a framework. Just like the weather, right? We have a weather map with here comes the warm front, here comes the cold front, right? It's a framework. It's a close way to describe reality, but the weather sure is unpredictable, right? That's the thing with like the weatherman or the weather lady, like they get up there and they have the charts and they have the graphs and they have the quantities, but the reality is you're dealing with a complex emergent system. And it's the same thing with our internal ecology, our internal landscape. I can talk about pain motivation and pleasure motivation, and we can kind of put a stake in the ground and have a conversation around that. But in reality, it's wet inside, it's messy inside, and we're going to have these things intermingling. And as we move through our personal and professional development, there's going to be points where that distinction is clear. There's going to be parts where we start to move through it and we start to realize, like, I can see this differently, right? We're going to start to question things because we're either motivated by pleasure or pain. So it's relative. And this is where the Buddhists come in with grasping and aversion, and you try to get your grasping towards pleasure, you try to get that amplitude down, and you try to get your aversion to pain, you try to get that amplitude down so that you can be more even keel. And the better we do with that, then the more we live in the present, right? And the more we embody that. So I've had practitioners come through in the past in our group and ask questions kind of along these lines. And this has pretty much been my thoughts on it from my own introspection, is that we can enjoy where we are and still enjoy where we're going, even if we don't exactly know where that is, right? And it's a lot of work too, internal work, to separate out like, okay, well, what do I want to create versus what do I think I should create, or versus comparing ourselves to other people, or just generally feeling like we should be further along than we are. And the other thing that I'll add to that that's been helpful for me is that there's a difference between speed and velocity, right? Speed is a change in position over time. It's how fast you're moving. Velocity is speed with a direction attached, right? So speed could be like you're going 55 miles an hour, and velocity is you're going 55 miles an hour headed north. Okay, that's a different deal. I think when we look at our careers and our progress, we're going to look at your situation and call it progress and go, okay, how am I doing? Am I as far along as I'd like to be? All this kind of self-talk can come up, but really we just want to put one foot in front of the other and keep going and never give up and just keep doing our thing. And at the same time, make sure we're putting one foot in front of the other in the right direction that's aligned with our principles and our values and the things that we hold true and the things that we want to create and the vision we have for how we want to affect the other people, the world we want to create, the paracosm, right? Because I would rather tiptoe if I'm headed the right direction than full out sprint going the wrong way or changing my mind a bunch of times and just zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. That's just motion for motion's sake, right? We don't accomplish anything with that. So you want to give yourself some credit. Even if you feel like you've been moving slowly on your path, you're on your path, right? Better that than to be racing on somebody else's path, right? Racing towards somebody else's dream that's not even your dream or your vision. That actually, there's a recipe for burnout for you, is to just fucking hit the gas, pedal to the metal, building somebody else's dream that you didn't even know wasn't your dream because it was just subconsciously installed on you earlier, whether it was in school or from cultural conditioning or your parents or whatever, right? Some kind of external source. And it's usually well-intentioned. People put these things on us, right? But that doesn't mean it's emergent, that it's bespoke to you. We got to figure that stuff out. So there's that. Okay, well, I can learn how to be happy and content where I am. So why should I change? Why should I grow? Right? If I'm so happy now, why should I even look at the next phase of my growth? Well, for one, the only constant is change. We know that, right? So we're going to be changing inside no matter what. So we may as well start to pay attention to this. We may as well start to guide it and try to bring out our own best qualities and then try to manifest that into the world in more efficient ways. That's my whole thing with going online, right? It's leveraged. Right now, for example, I'm sitting on my screen porch with a bunch of crickets talking to myself, right? Thinking out loud. But who knows how many people are going to benefit from these ideas, right? I'm leveraging that. I'm saying it once. It will be heard by many. That's the idea. If you're a health practitioner, that's part of what you need to be doing, is educating your patients and the people you work with. And there's no way to educate people one-to-one that's going to be as effective and high leverage as something like this, where you can speak one to many, right? And then maybe it's not even one of these things where you have to pick, because you could have a hybrid model where you've got certain pieces of information that are built that everybody pretty much needs to hear. And then you also have bespoke interactions, right? A one-on-one or in a group setting or at a live event where you can actually deeply connect with people. Or maybe it's even in your day-to-day brick and mortar. And you've just got an online program that's like supplementing what you do in your brick and mortar. But you know that the people who come in, that you talk to, that you touch, right? Those people have gotten into your pre-recorded stuff, so you don't have to waste time saying all that at their visit. You can get into more advanced things, more specific things, more bespoke things, but you know you've delivered context for them, right? So we start to use technology for this, because if you got something to say, you might as well say it, like for real. Put it out there, hit publish, right? Let people hear it. And speaking of context, that's another one, because the only constant is change, right? We're going to have internal change. It's going to happen no matter what. There's also going to be external change, of course, right? The world around us is going to change. So we need to understand our capacity for growth. We need to understand what our options are. We need to continually evolve ourselves into better and better positions so that if the world does change, right, if the context does shift, then we're ready for it. So for example, in 2020, I had already done the work to build an online program. Months, years prior, I'd been laying the foundations for that. So when everybody was closing their clinics because of social distancing and flattening the curve and all that kind of stuff, I just kept going with my online work. It was a blip, right? But that's because I was positioned in a way where when the external context shifted, I had options. I'd already done the work. So there are ways we can start to look higher and go, okay, well, if bigger things start to move, what am I building and how fragile is it based on contextual shifts? So for example, everybody with a one-on-one brick and mortar clinic who was ordered to shut down as a non-essential service, or who voluntarily closed their clinic just to be safe when we didn't know what we were dealing with and we were believing the media and all that kind of stuff, right? That's fragile to that kind of shift. So we can start to look at all of our systems and go, at the very least, even if I'm happy where I am, I want to put in some anti-fragile architecture into my systems so that if things start getting weird externally, which I can't control, I know that I've built in not only resilience, but also growth into the systems that I currently have, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I really love thinking about these things. But this is where it's at, right? Because we want to have it all, right? We want to cultivate peace and contentment and presence, enjoy where we are. We don't have to fucking hate where we are in order to be growing and developing and going deeper on our understandings of things, right? We don't have to. We can love where we are, and we can love where we're going. And if you're somebody who is pain motivated, that's okay too, right? You can feel that pain and be highly motivated to make some serious changes in how you're approaching your practice. That's okay too. I've seen also cases where the pain motivation actually transmutes, right? Somebody is in such pain about their current situation, and you do the right things, right? You put in the right kinds of changes and shifts into the systems. And now all of a sudden this person's like pleasure motivated, right? Because they've got their base, they've got their Maslow's hierarchies like taken care of, right? So now they shift into pleasure motivated. And it's like a whole different version of them comes out, right? People can transform. They really can. It's quite fascinating. So I would say for this kind of observation that's been shared in the group, think about these things in terms of pain, pleasure, motivation, transcending that, right? And then being okay with where you are or not, and being okay with where you're going, right? Having a plan, because we can't fight change. It's futile, right? It's nature. We study nature. That's our job, right? It's just kind of silly when we try to cling to something and just hope it stays static. It's just not the way things work. All right. Well, I hope that helps. I hope wherever you are that you've learned something about yourself, and by extension learned something about the people you serve, and you can be a more effective physician in these modern times. Until next time.